Alright, so here we have the Asteroids clone, and we'll just go ahead and do the final playthrough in order to show all the development for the game objects. From the left side of the screen you can actually see that it's spawning several different things, including the enemy ship's lookout, which is currently moving through all three vectors, which makes for kind of an interesting situation. And as you can see, if I manage to actually hit anything, it will destroy those. Though you have to be careful because I left it so that the lasers themselves will destroy your own ship. And you can just see that I got hit by one of my own lasers and respawned at the origin. So, I have the regular skating glide movements. I also incorporated like an emergency booster thing. And yeah. So in a little bit it should restart the spawner. Or not. Still having issues getting the emitter system to work to reset the spawner, but you can spawn, it'll automatically set it up to spawn 3, and then over here you can see the listing in the game manager that determines the spawn rate of the various enemies off of a maximum choice of 6. So right now I have it set up and filled with 4 asteroids and 2 enemy ships. It randomly chooses one from this list and then spawns it. There's the player lives that you can see here. So when the player gets hit by the laser or an asteroid or gets run into by the enemy ship, it'll automatically destroy them. Then up here you have the spawn count. That's how many enemies are going to be spawning on screen at once. The spawn time, the amount of time between the spawns, and then the spawn delay itself. The how long before it starts spawning them into the game to begin with. And since I'm actually using the sprite that was a resource on the page, as you can see when we first started it up, it points up towards the north, or 12 o'clock position on the screen. I did that because with the immediate start of the game, I have it rotate 90 degrees. The chase speed is the speed at which the enemy ships will chase the player. The rotation speed is the speed at which the player will rotate their ship. The ship speed is the speed at which the ship will go. The laser speed is how fast the laser moves once it's fired. The destroy delay would be for the auto destroy of the rocks, as in after they've been on the screen for 30 seconds, it would blow them up. Screen size Y and screen size X are used to determine the scrolling conditions of the field. Because if I take off game scrolling here and laser dies off screen there, then I also take off game scrolling rocks, the instant anything leaves the screen, it's dead. So for the player, if the player zips off the screen, they're dead. No if, and, or but. As soon as the player leaves the screen, that's it. Game over. Now I'll try to get one of the enemies to run off the edge of the screen without taking me with them. So here you see the rocks, which you saw previously, are capable of coming back on the screen after they've traveled off. However, with the boolean set up the way it is, as soon as they leave the screen, they're gone for good. And there you have it. And yes, watch. Zip. And my ship's gone. Okay, and that pretty much covers it for the actual applications of the gameplay itself. The lookout works with the red ship attempting to find wherever you are and move towards you on an collision intercept. And now let's go through the code. So here's the event emitter that I wanted to use in order to determine how many of the game objects were still working or how many had been destroyed. And then here's the code for the serialization where it has a private setup for the listing in order to determine what it's looking at. And here's me using the game manager to pass a variable from the game manager itself in order to set these all in one location, so I'm not constantly having to go all over the place. Here is the logic structure that I use in order to determine which objects are being selected for the for the baddie emitter, more or less. Further down here, it's tacking on the destroy event emitter to the new body being whatever gets spawned out of the emitter. And then down here it's supposed to keep track of the enemies being destroyed, but it doesn't really keep track of them super well. So here's the game manager. Here's where all those variables that were showing up on the game manager are actually stored. Here is the tracker in order to keep track of the game object in order to make sure it doesn't accidentally reinstantiate itself. The start and the update are of course blank. Here's the asteroid script itself where it pushes, and it was kind of rude for me, but with the emitter of the ship, when you change the asteroid from being a real physical game object to being a template that you create additional objects from, there's certain types of references that you can't store in them anymore. So when it comes down to this, I kept the get component for finding the player tag or finding the game object, then passing it to the ship, and then the ship passes the transform component. This is important because Smish Target uses the transform locations of the player ship in order to determine which way to throw the rocks. And that was kind of apparent when I was moving my ship during the spawn times, because the rocks would actually launch initially towards the ship, even if only if they had started to spawn. The difference being, of course, the chase ship. Auto-destroy rocks is basically just about, okay, after X number of seconds, this rock will just be destroyed. And then we have void update, which just tells us to what it does every time. This is for scrolling. This is if the rocks go off the screen, they get destroyed. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And then there's the private void down here for whenever it runs into something, it just blows up. The chase ship is pretty much the same. I just reorganized the code better so that it has an easier check when it's determining whether or not something's off the screen. This is just to make it scrolling. This is in the fixed updates, and this helps it heat seek on the player's location. And again, just like with the rocks, because I'm spawning an instance of the chase ship, I actually have to give it a pointer to the player ship in order to get it to track the player ship and try to take it out. Laser firing is the script that's attached to the firing zone in front of the ship. It's the one that works as the emitter for the lasers. I actually call this from the actual game, from the player ship itself, because I passed the get component in order to get access to fire the laser from the class laser firing in order to get the system to work together. All the controls are still singularly in the ship controls itself. This is laser hit. This is just what happens when the laser hits. This is for when the world is scrolling. This is for when the world is not scrolling. The way I actually have it in right now is so long as the game is scrolling, the lasers will continue to go around. So long as I can travel over the edge of the world and come out the other side, so can the lasers. And I did that to mainly add a bit of an additional difficulty, because otherwise I could have just swapped this with laser scrolling So once the laser actually left the screen, it'd be gone for good. We have ship go boom. This is the second part of the main ship, the main player ship control system. As soon as it's hit, the ship goes boom. And that's here. You can see where it deals with the lives and the respawning. Res.respawn is actually a part of SS controls, which is the main control for the ship. And all that really does is it uses coordinates already stored there for the ship to reset it to its 0, 0 set. So that when the ship is hit by something and still has lives left, it decrements the lives and then sets the player back to start. A more advanced system would probably temporarily disable this portion of it, like right here, on a timer, so that when the player respawned, they would have X amount of time of invulnerability, so they didn't just like repeatedly die at the spawn point. But that's for another day. SS controls over here. We have the controls for the ship. We have the game manager passing the screen size X, screen size Y, the ship speed, pretty much all the variables the designer can set at the game manager itself instead of having to hunt through the various scripts for everything else. Because the way I set the game manager up, it's just in an empty, and then everything else just references it in order to set up the variables that aren't self-dependent. Game manager instant ship speed. That's just pretty much a factor to deal with the fine-tuning. It can be taken out at any point in time. It's just one of the less mysterious numbers. Here's the booster speed. So the booster speed is going to, when you're holding shift, you can do an emergency dodge one way or another. This is another one of those things that would be really cool to put under a timer, so that you can't just like spam it to get away from things. But it moves you locally. So if your ship's pointing down towards the bottom of the screen and you hit right, it's going to actually take your ship left on the screen. So it could also screw with people if they aren't familiar with using it or aren't thinking from where they would be sitting in the cockpit. Down here, it's just the acceleration. The acceleration has been swapped out with tank controls, so up moves forward, down moves back, or stops forward thrusting. And since our sprite is right aligned, it moves up and down, is moving along the x-axis. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. Skate thrust. Okay, so up here is skate thrust. Down here is non-skate thrust. Except, of course, with the way that it's being done right now, this is just for when skate thrust is true or not. So if it's true, these are the kind of controls that you get. If it's not true, these are the kind of controls you get. If it's also not true, these are the kind of controls that you get, because you get a rotation. This portion of the code, I just hit space. Space calls pew pew, fire the laser. Pew pew, fire the laser is declared much earlier up here. Pew pew is equal to fire zones on get component laser firing, so it's actually getting the class that's attached to the empty in front of the ship. Down here we have input.get key down H, and that just, when you hit H, it just sends your ship back to the spawn point and eliminates all of its accelerations and rotations. Well, it doesn't eliminate the rotation, it just resets the rotation back to whatever rotation you had set in the game manager. Escape key quits it if it was running a full application. Game scrolling, this is just if the ship moves off the screen to send the ship back to the other side of the screen. This one's the part required by the class project. Destroy the ship if it goes off the edge of the screen. And you can't respawn if this happens, because I'm using the destroy ship command instead of iterating the life count. Because I mean, another place I could have put the life decrementer would be right here in the respawn. but it makes more sense to have the destruction script here take care of the decrement of it, because if you go off the edge of the screen when scrolling is not on, you're done. It's over. Okay, and that pretty much concludes the code read-through.